Welcome to the Worldview Podcast, the first episode where we talk religion, politics, philosophy, anything and everything to help you define what you believe and why you believe it so we can all be a little bit better. Today we have a very special guest, Joe Kendrick, a very good friend of mine. How you doing, Joe?
Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Kendrick.
Yes.
A very good friend of his.
Uh-huh.
I'm a YouTuber, I guess. I do music, I do film, I do gaming videos on my channel, all kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Look up Joe Kendrick, check me out.
Yeah, definitely. He has some awesome stuff on there. And sort of on the topic of creative side, we both have a lot of experience in film and music and graphics, you know. What kind of stuff have you done, Joe, specifically?
Well, I've done a lot of short films. Of course, I'm always coming out with EPs, so music is huge for me. That's the kind of stuff I'm most passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
And,
all right.
Yeah.
All right, sounds awesome. So I've also done a lot of film and stories for other people, promotional stuff, particularly with the church. And that's what we want to focus on this episode, pioneering episode, is discussing the purpose of creativity and art, specifically for the Christian, and how the Christian artist can fit into the world today. And as you heard, our focus is pretty much on video and music, so we're going to sort of approach this from that perspective.
Right.
I thought it would be helpful to start off by sort of defining some terms for us today. Firstly, we're going to define creativity, and let me get it up here. I'd like personally to define creativity as within this scheme as the what. New Oxford American says it is the use of imagination or original ideas, especially in the production of an artistic work. And so creativity is like the idea, the what behind the second thing, which is art, which I think is the how. It's how we express our creativity. And New Oxford American defines that as the expression or application of human creative skill and imagination. Beautiful. And so that does bring up a question of what is the why? You know, why are we creative, and why do we express our creativity through art? And I think, you know, knowing that we're Christians, the answer is pretty obvious.
Right, for us. Right.
God is the why. We are creative because God first created. And we express that creativity because God expressed his in, you know, the galaxies, the planets, you know, skies, ocean, earth, and all that inhabits it.
Exactly.
And I think the peak of God's creativity is humanity. I mean, you got to be really creative to come up with something like that. One thing I find interesting about the definition of creativity is that it's creating something original, because I think only God can create from nothing. I know only God can create from nothing.
Right.
And we're merely using the tools provided to us to imitate.
We're very good at rearranging.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at films, books, music, everything is really just like a repackaging of something else in a new way.
And God does give us the gift of reimagining, you know, but that only carries so far.
Yeah, I mean, we can't create from nothing, obviously.
Right.
I think that's pretty clear. And so if God is the why, then that sort of gives us our purpose in art, and the purpose would be to glorify him, you know, to imitate him, and to point others to him.
That's what it should be.
What it should be.
Right.
So maybe we should talk about what Christian art is. Christian artists today, you know, I think it's, from the outset, it's important to specify that there are Christian artists and artists that are Christian.
Exactly.
Example off the top of my head, you know, Chris Tomlin is a Christian artist. He makes Christian music. But there are people out there, I can't think of any on the spot, who are Christians, but their music isn't necessarily, obviously, you know, sharing the gospel within all their songs or stuff.
I think about like Kanye West off the top of my head. You know, like he's not someone who's trying to be this, I guess, gospel presenter, but he is someone that, you can see reflections of it in his music. But then there's also like a certain explicit nature to him, and so that kind of brings up a whole lot of other conversations.
Yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
I think an example of this that I just thought of in film would be Letitia Wright. She's an actress. She was in Black Panther. She played Shuri, Black Panther's younger sister. She is a very outgoing Christian,
Mm-hmm.
but Black Panther is pretty clearly not a Christian movie. And so that's an example of an artist that is a Christian, and not necessarily a Christian artist like, say, the Kendrick brothers.
Right. But
Who are not related to Joe, by the way.
they're not related
in
to
case
me.
you're wondering.
But it does make you ask, what is a Christian movie? Like, does a Christian movie have to be overtly Christian?
Yeah.
Because you could argue
that's a
that
good question.
Black Panther still has some Christian themes about unity,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and there's a salvation metaphor in there.
Yeah, definitely coming back from the dead in a way.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Hmm.
As present in that movie. But that's something to think about. Like, we have our why set ahead of us.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess you think about, not every artist is Christian.
Yeah,
A lot of them
obviously.
are. But you think about, like, what do you think motivates the people that aren't Christian? What do you think is their why?
It's a very good question. I think that's something to think about.
It is something to think about, yeah. It's a tough conversation. I've only had a couple times with people. Because
What have you heard from them about their why?
the people that I'm closest to creatively, are also very spiritual. Because, of course, like, our creativity comes from our spirituality a lot of the time. They're so interconnected with prayer versus coming up with ideas. It's hard to separate that. And I think they're tapping into the same thing that we are, while we may be tapping into, like, what the Holy Spirit is giving us. Non-Christians, the way that they see it, they think they're kind of tapping into the ideas within themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And
really those ideas are coming from God. Are you saying that?
right. That's what I think.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I can see that definitely. Because, a lot of art expresses some sort of opinion. Like, if you look back, they're all trying, a lot of them have an agenda.
This is true.
So maybe a lot of non-Christians are creating art with the purpose of expressing, I guess, here's an explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they're trying to express a particular emotion, or maybe they're trying to express an idea.
Mm-hmm. I guess that's not
Just some
exclusive
thoughts.
to non-Christian art, though, because, of course, Christian artists,
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's very true.
even, I guess, especially with, like, the Kendrick brothers and Pure Flix, like, and I don't necessarily say this to say anything less of their art, but they definitely have, like, an agenda as well.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. That's something we'll talk about later.
Right. You can argue it's a fine agenda, but we can get into that later.
Yeah.
Put a pin in it.
Yeah, that's a good question, though. And it sort of brings up the thought of, how are we as Christians doing in art? Like, what's the current state of Christian art right now, do you think?
The current state of Christian art, it's definitely out there, but I think we can both agree that it's not to the quality that we wish it was overall.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
People are settling for less. Artists are settling for less, and people who eat up art are settling for less.
Yeah.
And I think it creates this idea that even when you're making less, that's somehow people are getting used to art that's not as good as it could be.
Mm-hmm.
And so that fuels the creation of more art that is just okay. And I think people are forgetting what their potential is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like a lot of artists, or particularly Christian art, you can see this in pop as well,
Right.
but just repetitive money-making schemes.
Exactly.
It sounds bad to say that about Christian art, and maybe their hearts are in the right place.
That's the
But
thing.
I have a hard time believing that their hearts are in the right place because the business model for particularly movies and music
Right.
is just too good to be completely innocent. I mean, you could say, God has blessed their work, but their work is, I mean, if it's, I don't know, I just have a hard time believing that it's, some blessing from God. And
Right.
I think it's more of a good business model because you see these big companies now jumping into Christian movies
Right.
because they see the market there. Christian movies tend to make a really good profit.
Exactly. Because there's kind of like a guilt, guilting audiences into appreciating it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they have free advertising from a lot of pastors and stuff saying, I saw this movie, it was great. And so the pastor tells his congregation goes to see it, as suddenly, 100 to several thousand tickets sold.
Right.
And that's just, and I think the big companies realize that. And so now they're jumping in to make these movies. Like, I can only imagine, as far as I'm pretty sure it was made by Paramount. I should have looked it up, which is not a Christian company. I don't know if the director was Christian or anything, but clearly their intentions were to make money because the story itself is, I know I'm going to offend a lot of people who like the movie. If you like the movie, you're not evil or bad or anything.
Which movie?
It's just my opinion. I can only imagine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It was a pretty average story. Like, we've seen it 1,000 times. An artist struggles to find himself, his identity in his art while he's reconciling with his father.
Okay.
And we've seen that story a lot in movies and film and really in all kinds of art.
Right.
But it's when you take that normal story and you pair it with this huge hit song, all of a sudden it makes tons of money. And that just seems kind of perfect to me. Too perfect to be their hearts are in the right place, because that is just a money-making scheme right there of saying, this is an average story. We're not here to tell a great story. We're here to make money because this song is popular.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe their hearts are in the right place. Maybe they actually are being innocent when they're doing this. But I don't know. I feel like I need a little more explanation to truly believe that.
Right. I mean, there's some stars in that movie.
Yeah.
And I mean, those are by the Erwin brothers, were the directors, who also directed Woodlawn. It seems that there was, I don't think I Can Only Imagine. I think that didn't have anything to do with Pureflix, but Woodlawn, of course, was in part produced by Pureflix.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think maybe not Pureflix, but at least the Kendrick brothers are. I think their hearts are in the right place. They're just, no offense, they're just straight up not very good artists. They're pastors.
Right. I mean, like, I think there's an argument for, parts of it. Being a Kendrick, I guess, I wish. I want to defend them to an extent. And
yeah.
And I think that with the Kendrick brothers, what I see is that they're doing the best that they can. Maybe just because they're not filmmakers, they're pastors, that's shining through.
Yeah.
But I
think so.
Yeah, like, you can tell that the movies could have been better. But I like to think that they're doing the best that they can to make the best movie that they can with the best message that they can. But it's
I think that's fair.
But Pureflix could do better.
Yeah, Pureflix could do better. I think the Kendrick brothers do have their hearts in the right place.
I don't think they're settling for less. I just think they're not as good as other directors.
Yeah, I mean, they're not Christopher Nolan or anything.
Right. They're doing their best.
Yeah.
I'm more, I don't know, maybe that's the Kendrick bias.
I don't know. I think I understand with you. I think I agree with that.
Yeah. I love criticizing Christian art, of course. But I guess I'm defending them in this case.
Yeah. And I think that brings up an interesting idea of, is it more important to create good art or to have your heart in the right place?
I mean, I think having your heart in the right place and doing the best you can. I mean, because I know that with ourselves, with our own films, like there's times when we haven't made, I guess, the ideal film that we wanted to, but it was still the best that we could put together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's still valuable. Like we can't ask for anything more of ourselves than we're able to do.
That's fair.
So I think having our heart in the right place, that's something that I guess ultimately that's probably the most important thing as a creator.
Yeah.
I don't know. I may change my stance on that later. We'll see.
I mean, I think it's definitely important to do the best, to try to make good art. Strive for good art,
Right.
but maybe not.
I mean, yeah, I do
Maybe
wish I do wish there was better
Go ahead.
art being made.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that when, companies like PureFlix are able, they have the resources to be able to make, whatever they want and sell it, then they should be able to want to make something better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think Woodlawn was a good step in the right direction.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. It's like I think about like the God's Not Dead series, and all the
Yeah.
potential that had to really be good. When it turns out that it was sold to like only one audience, the Christian audience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about just like what would happen if God's Not Dead it took its messages and tried to be something that anyone could watch, so that anyone could unpack that on both sides.
Yeah.
It's like when you're preaching to the choir, what good are you doing?
Yeah, there's definitely potential in these ideas, but just execution is really lacking.
Right. Exactly.
And I think they're more in music, less. I haven't seen much in movies because indie movies don't really get out as much. But I think there is good art out there,
Oh yeah,
especially in music, but you just have to find it. Good Christian art.
that's true. That's definitely
You
true.
just have to look for it, And it typically comes from small production companies.
This is very true.
Like hip hop or whatever, Humble Beast. I mean, they're getting much bigger, but they're definitely one of the more solid companies out there that is producing music.
Right.
So it's there. It's just hard to find.
And even like the big Christian artists, it's like I think that they're fine as musicians. There's a reason that they sell.
Yeah.
But like there's so much formulaic. There's a formulaic nature to most of the music that you wonder how genuine it is. It feels like a cash grab.
Yeah. Because it's like we want people to feel good about themselves,
Right.
yet not quite convict them.
Exactly.
We want to make them feel like they're coming back to God without making them actually have to come back to God, in a way.
Right. And I struggle with it, just like the idea of it, because of course, like a lot of it is worship music. It's made to be played, in front of a congregation
That's fair.
and let them worship to it. So to that extent, music that does that, I guess like you can't judge it the same way you would judge a song you listen to, I guess like to be reflective but I don't know, like I guess if we should always be in a constant state of worship, if that's our call as Christians, to like let everything we do be worshiping to God, then maybe that distinction isn't worth as much. Maybe we should strive to make the best art we can do that has the best, that can be convicting while also, being good art.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think there are times when you need to be convicted and times when you need to just worship.
Right. I mean, I agree with that too. It's just like, how do you balance it? Because it seems like, I mean, there's definitely great Christian art out there where you can sit there and allow it to give you that conviction, but most of the stuff on top is just kind of like surface level worship songs.
Mm-hmm. which I mean is not necessarily a bad thing if they have, a solid message behind it.
Right. It's just, it could be better.
But I think it's frustrating to me as an artist
right.
to see that and be like, man, you can do better.
Exactly.
You don't have to settle for that.
And I know, like, being in church, like, it was very easy for me to kind of feel disconnected to some of those songs, as someone who's worshiping, because like you see other people, and like it's touching them just fine, and I'm like, I want to be able to worship to that, but here I am, all I can do is critique the artistry of it and wish it was a better song,
Yeah, I've had to really learn to stay. I have to focus if I want to worship to those songs.
Exactly.
It's kind of weird.
And it's like, when you're worshiping, like, I guess the most important thing is to worship.
Yeah.
So I don't want to let that bog any of us down. But yeah, it's, you can't help but wish it was better.
Yeah. And I think that may just be a thing as us as artists that we struggle with.
That's true too. I don't know, but I've talked to people, who even aren't songwriters about it. And I know for our church, and there's a lot of other churches that went a similar route, that the congregation worshiping slowly moved from hymns to, the more Christian rock, worship music, and that's something that a lot of people kind of felt disconnected by, especially the older audience. Talking to, the ladies I worked with, or people around my parents. And I guess I don't want to sound like an old person, but as when it comes to worshiping, I'm a sucker for those old hymns. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Because
I think they just have more thought behind them.
they're poetic, and their melodies, are more than just three notes, So
4-chord song.
right, like they do a good job with having different chord structures.
Yeah. And that may just be opinion. I don't know.
Right, I don't know.
But I guess it sort of depends on the purpose. Is it created to glorify God, or is it created to make it easier for the average person to worship?
And that's a good point. I guess there's value in making a song easier to understand, I guess, to that extent.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I guess that's respectable to an extent when you think about it that way. Making music that I guess that the masses can latch onto easier.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I feel like there's a balance, because I guess there is an argument, especially with the old hymns, that their language is just, can be very bogging down. It's like the King James Version,
And that's why we see a lot of modern renditions of hymns.
Right, like that's exactly what I'm thinking. Like, there's tons of new versions of the old hymns that, they keep the melody, they keep the poeticness of the lyrics. It's just easier to, to understand. So they're out there.
Yeah. And I think there are worship songs out there that are not basic.
Yeah.
That are very well done. But maybe sometimes it's hard for a church to adapt to things like that all the time.
Right.
Maybe it's hard to... Some songs are so creative that you literally just can't replicate it in church,
Right. Sometimes it's like...
And that's possibly why all these worship songs have done so well, is because they're easy to do. You literally just need a guitar or a piano and a voice.
That's true.
And they work. But again, with hymns, all you needed was your voice. So it's like, I don't know. It's hard.
Yeah. And I think about a lot of like the new good Christian music that sometimes it's so heavily, I guess, performance inducive that, there's a lot of rap, or there's a lot of like, there's a certain thing that only the performer could do. And so,
absolutely.
Yeah, it can be hard to give that to a congregation.
Yeah. It has become a lot about performing things instead of, which is weird because you think that these songs are meant to make it easier to worship,
Right.
but in some cases they've made it harder because it's become more of a performance thing.
Exactly. It's hard when like in, even in a worship setting, when the lead vocalist, who I guess the audience is or the congregation is supposed to kind of replicate and go along with, when they're suddenly just hitting the high notes and you go, well, what am I supposed to sing?
Yeah,
What
precisely.
What am I supposed to do? I can't hit that. I want to sing along.
So do you
though.
think? So do you think that modern Christian music was going in the right direction of making things easier to worship to, and yet missed its purpose, and went to a performance type thing?
I mean, I think there's value in both settings. And I think, I don't know, I think the hymns are perfectly fine with, giving something the congregation that they can worship to and sing to, I think those worked and stood the test of time. There's a reason that we still know a lot of those old hymns, And I don't know, and it may just be like a sort of nostalgic thing that like those are the songs I grew up worshiping to. And I mean, they're the songs that so many people grew up worshiping to, that's like, that feels more genuine to worship to for me. But I guess as far as making new music, I guess I respect the nobility in making something that's more accessible. I guess I just wished that it was, complex enough to be more, to be a better use of art, to be more creative. Because like I like the idea of it being simple if it was more creative. So when that's missing, it just feels like a step in the wrong direction. And like when it comes to artists being performers instead of just giving the congregation something simple, like I respect it, because when you're passionate, that should come across in your performance. That should, we should hear how zealous someone is to worship by, and that there's nothing wrong with hitting the high notes and doing all that, having those fast raps and showing off. God gave us these gifts, we should use them.
But do you think that misses the point of worship music? Or is it even an entirely different genre of music?
That's a tough thing. For worship music, I feel like maybe it should probably be more about the melody and giving the congregation something to sing along to. But I think, if that's set, and that's not, if you have something that is kind of something that they can latch onto, you can totally riff on top of it, and you can totally hit high notes over that,
sort of to add to the complexity without necessarily alienating people from singing or from joining in.
Exactly. It's just hard when you want to join in. You go, well, that's just part of the song, and I can't do that part of the song. So.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on In Christ Alone? Because it's not technically a hymn. It's more modern, but it's very, very popular.
It's been a while since I've heard that, but I remember liking it, singing along to it a bunch. I get it. I get them all mixed up though. That's the thing, because I've heard that lyric in so many of the modern. So yeah, I'm listening to it right now. It's this one.
Zagetti's.
Yeah. And it borrows from a lot of those old hymn.
It feels like an old hymn,
it does,
but it's not.
I like that. I like that feeling. And that's something that I remember liking a lot to worship to. I like that direction. I mean, when it comes to like the sonic environment, I guess like you hear a lot of the same sounds, but that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, it's
a medium, of course, there's a certain way that songs are going to sound. But songwriting wise, I think that's the kind of thing we need more of. I guess, I don't know, there's an argument that it's stepping back and maybe we need to focus on new sounds. But the fact that it's a step away from not being creative, it's complex. or it's more complex.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
There's more thought put into it than a lot of these newfangled new age things.
exactly. So I really respect that and the amount of thought
Yeah.
that went into that.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. But maybe just because it sounds older, I don't know.
Maybe.
I'm open to like a new genre if it's creative.
Yeah.
So I'm fine if like the new agey stuff worked, if it was just, had that extra spark. But it doesn't yet.
Yeah.
Not to me.
So sort of switching gears here, what do you think are some of the struggles of the Christian artist? I guess particularly in where do we draw the line and at what point should we not create something?
This
Obviously there's a sacrilegious boundary of, if something is insulting or demeaning to God.
Right.
That's obviously way too far.
Exactly.
But at what point is art too worldly? Like maybe it doesn't insult God, but it doesn't necessarily reference him.
Right. It's a tough
Or
question.
reference the gospel.
Because I think there's
Yeah.
a place really for pretty much all art. I think like the only boundary is if, similar to sacrilege, if it encourages unethical behavior. I think that's pretty much the only other boundary, and that's something that you still see in music, a little bit. But I think most of it, we should not be able to, we shouldn't limit ourselves to certain conversations. I think anything that is thoughtful is worth something, in my opinion. Because like I said before, you have people like Kanye West who, they're, to what I understand, he's a Christian, making art that's not always, not every single song is reverent. I mean, and he has songs like, he has this Jesus tour, which is where he's trying to, maybe say something religious, and maybe that's sacrilegious. Who knows? There's an argument either way. But I think anything, I think all art is pretty much good art as long as it's not calling to action immorality.
I'd say that's fair.
That's
Do you think there is an obligation to express certain themes within Christian art?
well. And I don't want to steal your thunder, but you talked about like, does nature inherently express certain themes? And that's God's art. I don't know. I think as Christians, like we have an obligation to the Great Commission, and that to some extent that should be evident through our art, at least a little bit, but maybe not in every piece, But
like you brought up C.S. Lewis in Chronicles of Narnia.
Right.
I mean, that's a little more on the nose example of saying, it was kind of a metaphor, but it was still pretty clearly a metaphor.
Right, but it didn't say the name Jesus.
Yeah. And I know Tolkien sort of disagreed with Lewis on how much Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings.
Right.
Lord of the Rings has a lot of very obvious Christian themes in it,
And
Return of the King.
Exactly.
All that stuff.
Exactly.
But it's a little more out there, as in it has a lot of themes, but it definitely is not a direct metaphor for or simile to the gospel story like Chronicles of Narnia is. But I think they both have value.
Exactly, and for different reasons, especially with Tolkien, because you think about the amount of world building, the amount of creativity. It's like Tolkien used his God-given gift of creativity, and like even if he didn't, like, obviously promote Christian themes through it. I mean, they're there, but even if they aren't obvious, he still used the talents that God gave him, and that's still, that's still worth something. That's still our obligation as creators.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a huge part of it.
I think that quote that I mentioned to you before from myself, God didn't write, "See my glory in the sky."
Exactly.
Yet we can still see it in the sky, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't necessarily have to be, look, here's God in my art. But you can still express, you know, you can still worship God by creating something with Christian themes,
Mm-hmm.
or just even creating something great for Him.
Exactly. But on the inverse, calling attention to God in a piece of art that didn't have an amount of love put into it feels awkward. When you have
Yeah.
subpar or art that, is obviously not the greatest that the artist could do, and they're slapping a sticker on it being like, yeah, this is my this is my way of expressing my religion. And then it just feels like
Yeah.
that's the best you could do, on the inverse.
I mean, doesn't God deserve a little bit better than
Exactly. Like, why are you going to put his name on this?
that? Mm-hmm.
I mean, and maybe that's disrespectful to the artist. I don't know. But I think you can tell, when someone could be better and could be doing better.
Or if they're just not good at all.
Yeah, and I think that's almost better if you're not good at all, but you're trying your best.
Yeah.
But that's a very Joe Kendrick thing to say, because, of course, like, I'm very transparent about my growth, and, even when I'm not very good at something, I still, will present it and be like, well, this is the best I could do.
Yeah.
And maybe that's a mistake. I don't know.
That's an interesting idea of, like, do you think the best that we can do is what we should reach for, or do you think we should reach for something else? Like, what is the end goal of Christian art? We see where Christian art is today,
Right.
But where should we be?
It's a tough question, and it's something that I know I have my biases in loving the old hymns, and my favorite movies, usually aren't Christian movies.
Yeah.
I think, what is it? Courageous by the Kendrick brothers. I think that's still one of my favorite films.
It was definitely one of their better films.
Yeah, I mean, I can say that even with regards to, it not necessarily being specifically a Christian film, like, it's still a good film, I think. And maybe I just watched it at the right time, being like a preteen. And so that's the thing, is like, I realize I'm not always objective when it comes to what I think is good. I'd like to just see more creativity, though, and especially in music. I think that's the direction we need to head in. And like I said, like, I think as long as people are trying their best, that shines through. It doesn't mean that everything should be great, because everyone's best is different. But we still need more people just trying their best.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
What's your vision for how things should be?
Well, see, like, my initial idea is to want to go into all these, what I want in Christian art.
Right.
And I guess what's hard is, one of my thoughts is, we need to make more art that's not just for Christians.
Exactly. I agree with that.
Something that can reach other people and won't alienate them.
Mm-hmm.
Because I feel like a lot of modern songs can be poetic in their use of, not being very specific.
Right. This is very true.
Which, I mean, it is an expression of art, but it kind of has its disadvantages. Because if you're not a Christian and you go into church and they're singing one of those vague songs,
Right.
You're like, I don't understand any of this. I don't know what this means.
But you still want it to be accessible.
Yeah.
It's shareable.
So something that has its, or at least one aspect that I'd like to see come out is something that is our songs or music or movies that, Christians can appreciate and enjoy, yet so can non-Christians. It doesn't alienate those. Because God's Not Dead alienates non-Christians.
Exactly. That's the thing.
It does. but
And it didn't have to be that way.
something. Yeah, no, it didn't.
It could have been a story
And
both sides could have watched.
yeah, and it could have had a huge impact.
Right.
And I think there are stories out there that are like that are of Christian literature, especially.
Right.
There are a lot of stories out there that are not inherently for Christians or obviously Christian art.
Right.
Because, like we said before, Chronicles of Narnia,
Mm-hmm.
Lord of the Rings. Have you heard of the Door Within series?
I'm not familiar
Can't
with
remember
that.
who wrote it. It was, as a Christian reading it, I could definitely see the similarities. But I can see how people who are not Christians can enjoy that book. It was good writing. It was good art, regardless of whether it had all those Christian themes and a,
Mm-hmm.
Christian message underneath it. And so it's like, I want good art that both sides, at least one aspect. I want one aspect of art where both sides can enjoy, which is a really hard thing to ask. Because that's really hard to do.
It's a lot to ask. Did you ever read the Shadow Children series?
No, I didn't.
It was Among the Hidden was the first book. I just remembered it because it was something I read back in elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a young adult novel.
Mm-hmm.
But it's by this Margaret Peterson Haddix, and it's about it was during that, I guess it was a prequel to the dystopian trend, but it was about a overpopulation within a country, so families are limited to 2 children. And there was this, it's about a family, it's kind of on the nose, where the youngest kid is named Luke, and his brothers are Matthew and Mark. So,
yeah.
And you can bet that there's going to be a 4th kid eventually named John. So
yeah.
that's book 2, I think. And there's a lot of Christian themes in there, of course. But it's subtle enough where it's not on the nose. I think it was a really good balance of introducing themes, and maybe some very subtle pro-life themes, because it was about like limiting the population, but in a way that's not political. Even though it's about politics, it was not. It wasn't about our politics. So, that was something I just thought of, that I really like the way that it carried its message and its Christian themes.
Yeah, I think expressing themes, Christian themes within art, is a really powerful way of being able to, impact Christians and have a good influence on them.
Yeah.
But also not alienate the non-Christians. I think themes are the way to go.
Yeah, and we talked about Christopher Nolan earlier. And you talk about like the end of The Dark Knight, like that's one of the strongest Jesus metaphors. Just in like
there are a lot of Jesus metaphors in movies.
Exactly. There's a whole bunch of Jesus metaphors in there. Yeah. There's tons of examples.
Zack Snyder.
Yeah, that's true too. That's true too. Yeah.
Every single movie, man.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and he's a whole nother bag of worms, because we wish that he was doing his best. Maybe he is.
Yeah.
Maybe he is. Who knows? That's a whole different.
I guess the best way to judge that is to take their best film,
right,
and see what they are at their best.
Yeah.
Maybe it hasn't come out yet.
Maybe not.
Maybe. But
I want him to do good, because I think he has certain skills that I respect. And visually, like as a Christian too, like the way that he has certain themes in his movies, that are strong and powerful and operatic and religious at times, but there's no substance to back up those themes, usually.
Yeah. I found an interesting example of that, still on the topic of superhero movies.
Right.
Joss Whedon with, I know you're not big on Marvel.
I respect Marvel.
But
I'm bigger than I used to be.
Okay. But with Age of Ultron, there were a lot of biblical references and stuff. And it wasn't even, you see a lot of Jesus references and not that aren't really respectful or meant to be, or whatever. But Joss Whedon had a lot of, I don't know if he's a Christian or anything, but he had a lot of themes and a lot of lines in his film that were direct biblical references.
Right.
So I find it interesting that, and even in non-Christian art, you're seeing a lot of Christian influences.
That movie's an interesting parallel, I guess, to our discussion, though, because it's all about creating something and deciding if it's the best thing to create.
Yeah,
and thinking about
very
it.
True.
Age of Ultron.
So secretly, this podcast is brilliant.
Right, secretly. But yeah, you wonder. I guess there's a question: is if Tony knew what Ultron was going to be, would he still have created it, or was it still worth, creating?
Yeah, it's interesting.
And that applies to us, like, when it comes to explicit material, or, I think all art is worth creating, but I guess some of it, comes at a risk.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen Christian artists take risks before.
Right. Yeah, and I think before, just to tie it all in too, because superhero movies, something that they're compared to a lot is like mythology, but like the way that superheroes are turned into gods a lot of the times. And so, of course, there's Christian themes that go along with that, especially with the Christ story of Jesus coming to earth from heaven. So there's that metaphor is, you see it in Superman coming from an alien world. You see it in Thor coming from the sky. All those kinds of stuff. I think that's interesting to unpack.
Yeah. It's crazy. Like, you can't deny the impact that Christianity has had on art.
Exactly.
You almost can't avoid it.
I mean, that's why we have a superhero genre is, because of the life of Jesus and the prophecies of Jesus before Jesus came to earth. There was still the Greek mythology, which of course, there's a lot of biblical roots. Jadu, what do you call it? Like a lot of Jewish roots in Greek mythology as well that are unmistakable.
Yeah. I feel like superheroes are our Greek mythology of today.
They are. They have Christian roots, and they tell these, it's definitely those kinds of stories.
Yeah. Well, this has been interesting, Joe.
Yeah, we're starting to derail possibly.
Yeah, we went from discussing creativity in art to discussing what superhero films are.
That's us knowing ourselves, though. So
that's what happens when you put us in a room for 40 minutes.
Should we tie it all down and give a couple final statements concerning what final changes there should be in the Christian art market?
Yeah. I think one thing that I would like to see that we obviously discussed is more of expressing themes that don't necessarily, themes from the Bible that aren't excluding non-Christians by their complexity or their, you don't necessarily have to know the Bible to understand the themes and to realize that it's, coming from the Bible and it's referencing God. That's what I'd like to see more of in Christian art. It's a hard thing to ask.
Right.
Hard to live up to, but I think that'd be really cool to see. What about you?
I think just as an artist, like purely artistic complexity, if we could see more of that in Christian art, because I wish that Christian art could be at the same artistic level as non-Christian art, and we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, I think we've had a good discussion today.
Yeah, thank you, everyone who decided to join us. This has been a great first episode, kind of long. Can't wait to edit this. It's going to be a pain. But anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for joining us. And have a great morning, evening, afternoon, or night, wherever you are, whatever you're doing.
Right.
And we will talk to you later. Have a good one.
Bye.